Meghan Telpner, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to be here. So, to give a bit of context, because I always like to give a bit of context, Meghan and I met not too long ago. We were both speaking at a fundraising event, actually. And it's not often that I come across women in the wellness space that really have this sort of integrative practice around emotional intelligence, emotional resilience. And so when I heard Meghan speak and her absolute brilliance and the depth of knowledge that she has to share in this particular area, I knew that I had to bring your brilliance to my audience. I know that what you're going to share is going to definitely resonate with them. And we'll cover a few really important topics today. But what I'd love to start with, Meghan, and what I'm like selfishly always fascinated about is your personal journey. I'm always fascinated about that with female entrepreneurs in particular. Like, how did you go from nutrition to emotional resilience? Like, tell me that story.
Well, it actually starts before nutrition. I was in the fashion industry. So my undergrad was in fashion. I worked in advertising for 3 years, 9 different jobs, and my health was deteriorating. I was getting sicker and sicker, going from doctor to doctor until I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that I was told had no cure. And I was 26 at the time, and it kind of lit a spark that I'm like, if no one else is going to be able to solve this, I'm going to have to solve it myself. And so my multi-pronged approach, having no understanding of the human body, the human psyche, emotional intelligence, like didn't cross my mind, was that I was going to have to figure this out. And so I found a doctor of Chinese medicine. I started going to yoga, and like I'd never done yoga in my life. I was, going to the gym at 5 a.m. and doing intensive workouts till I thought I would vomit. That's where I was at in my life. So I started doing that, and and then I was introduced to a meditation teacher, and it just kind of, I don't want to say it just kind of happened, but all of these practices came into my life and I healed. So I resolved this chronic health issue that had gotten progressively worse for the previous 3 or 5 years. And so at that point, I still didn't understand the psycho-spiritual component of disease or how that had contributed to my health issue, but I knew that nutrition had. And so that's how I ended up studying nutrition and getting to the nutrition field. And from there, I realized that, supplements are great. Understanding how the body works is important, but if we're not paying attention to what we're eating, nothing else is going to work. And so I got into the food side of nutrition, or culinary nutrition, which is what I still do primarily. And then, but all the while, I was still practicing my meditation practice, coherence practices. I was continuously doing spiritual development, understanding the difference between the mind and who we are as beings, and really learning about how to, I wouldn't say disconnect from our thoughts and feelings, but recognizing that when a thought comes into your mind and suddenly you feel a physical reaction, you feel, whether it's like that sinking feeling in your stomach, or you feel jittery, or like you can't sit still, or you're looking for distraction, I knew that was part of it. And it kept coming up when people would contact me about their own, getting the same diagnosis, saying, what did you do to heal? And it was like, did you go gluten-free? Did you cut out dairy? Did you cut out sugar? It's like, yes, all of the above. And I started meditating every day, and I started paying attention to the media I was taking in, and I started paying attention to my relationships and my own thoughts and my own language that I used, and how I conducted myself day to day, and where I set my boundaries. And so for me, that emotional component was always part of the health practice. But in the last 2 years, with this inundation of chronic high levels of stress, made me realize that I had to share it, that it couldn't just be something I kept to myself, even if I didn't feel like I was, a quote trained expert in it. I had the experience, I had the vocabulary to share it, that it was going to be critical, because just eating, quinoa or a kale salad or a green smoothie is no longer enough to support or supplement other areas of ill health in our whole being.
Can we pause there? Because I feel like it's such a simple statement, but you dropped such a powerful, like, truth bomb, right? It's no longer enough right? Like there's been such a shift in the last 2 years. Love that you brought that up. The increased levels of stress. You and I both know the increased levels of mental health distress. It's just all around us. And it's fascinating to me that while you were sort of steeped in culinary nutrition, this piece for you had always been a powerful part of your own healing, powerful part of your own practice. And you were able to see the integration, I imagine, with the world and the people that you serve, right? That this is no longer enough. If we're going to really take our health to the next level, if we're going to thrive during these really challenging times, we're going to need something more.
Yeah. And, it had always been part of my life and my practice because I'm an entrepreneur. And I knew that it wasn't just, I can eat healthy and I can exercise and I can do all those things. But if I'm going to also lead a team and lead a community of people from around the world and be a public figure to some extent, with a blog and with receiving hate mail and with all the things that come with being out there with opinions or recommendations that are counter to the paradigm, I'm going to receive pushback from people
Yes.
as a nice way of putting it. And so if I'm going to cope with that and with running a business and being responsible for other people's livelihoods, I needed more tools just for my own nervous system to keep functioning so I could stay healthy enough to operate at the high level I need to operate. And so with the last 2 years, it's like, well, everyone now needs to operate at a high level because of this inundation. And most people don't simply have those tools. And we saw that very, very quickly, where those that were in the delicate balance hit a crash pretty hard.
That's right.
And we saw it with dietary changes. We saw it we see it now with language people use and how people speak to each other and all of that. It just snapped. And And the other part to it that I realized was that, like, you have to be actively choosing ignorance to not see that there are so many levels to what's happening, that it wasn't just like, a virus and a public health crisis. It was like, there's so much to it. And I realized that early on, I was trying to get in the weeds and trying to explain why this was so wrong. That the very basic level, like, why aren't officials asking people to take active measures to improve their health? Like, if we just look at that, so it doesn't have to get controversial. It's just, that. And I was like, I would try to explain it and no one could hear me because they were so set in this fear. And I point to different parts of the brain, like they were hanging out in the back of the brain in the survival mode.
Yes.
And I realized that if I could start inclusively and not from like a woo-woo place, because that can turn people off too. Allow people a practice that brings them into that front, new human, critical, creative thinking part of the brain. I didn't have to explain why this whole situation was broken. They'd be open enough to say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Why is that? And be in a place mentally and emotionally to receive new information that could be counter to existing beliefs.
Yes, I love that. And I've taken part in one of your practices and it was so powerful. And you can literally feel the shift in the neurochemistry. You can literally feel the shift in the nervous system. You can feel yourself down regulate, right? Like, I think what's so powerful, Meghan, about how you bring emotional resilience to your work is you do it from an experiential place. You take people through the experience so that they can physically feel it. They can feel physiologically what it does to our breath, what it does to our heart rate, what it does to our body. Like, you can literally, I remember being in that practice with you at that speaking event, you could sort of see everyone just sort of their shoulders drop.
Yeah.
You could almost like hear the quietness.
Yeah. And one of the things I do, and in that specific workshop, and I have this one available free and open to everybody because I believe so strongly that everyone needs this practice every day. But I'll ask people and I'll say, like, what is that driving emotion that you wake up with in the day that sucks your energy? And it's always the same. It's stress, anxiety, fear, like that frequency.
Yes.
And I'll then ask, what would life be like without that? And the
Mhm.
answers again are always the same, like joyful, free, peaceful. And so I do that practice. And then the first question I ask people is, what is the first word that comes to your mind that describes how you feel? And it's
Mm.
always that same emotion. And it's a heart-based
Yes. Oh, I
emotion.
love that. I love, we're going to link it all up. And if you're listening, like I'm going to plug it right now because it was so powerful. It was so insightful. And it was one of those, um, one of those experiences, Megan, where it's like, you don't have to say anything more other than taking people through the experience to
Yeah.
help them to understand the value, the science, the research behind what it is that you're teaching. And I
Yeah.
love that. Like it just
Yeah.
spoke volumes.
Yeah. So it is available. It's at meghantelpner.com/magic. And the other part to it, and it was interesting because, you get asked to do things sometimes and you're like, oh gosh, no, that's not me. Like I'm not qualified for that. And it was about a year ago that I saw this facilitator training for this practice it was through Heart Math. It's not like a secret. I didn't invent it. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. It was like a low cost thing. And the requirement was that you taught it for free. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, like whatever, maybe I'll do an Instagram live and share it. And it was no big deal. And then I'm part of this business group and they had approached me and saying, could you teach this as part of our at home conference day? And I was like,
Mm.
what? Like I can teach people how to cook like that. I know. And I'm like, I don't think I'm qualified for this. And it's to like a very high level, like people that I 100% look up to
Yeah.
in all spectrums of what they create in their lives. And I was just like, well, I'm going to do it. And
Mm.
so in figuring out how I was going to teach it to this demographic of people that is not in the holistic health space, is not in the wellness world, is not in the emotional intelligence world, I was like, I'm going to go with the scientific explanation simplified.
Yes.
Really look at what is it doing to our biochemistry and how do I show them that they don't have to, sit cross-legged and have the crystals and the incense. It's just a simple thing that can be done and the way I positioned it with this demographic of people is you do this at the beginning of team meetings and your team will function more cohesively, be more creative and more solution driven. It will be better for your business. And for them, that's like, right, okay, I can do that. And then for you and I, who, or for people who may be busy parents and
Mm.
self-employed and have a lot on the
Yes.
go, it's like, okay, this will bring solution-oriented thinking to a business challenge, but could also bring a calmness to the dinner table before everyone eats.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
not something that everyone at the table needs to do. And that's one of my favorite things about this. And what the research shows is that if I went into coherence before we met today, our interview would be at a different level. Just by me being in a different state would elevate your state. So that,
Absolutely.
and that's why I look at this from a global perspective, that the more people who practice this very simple practice, and it's really just about opening your heart and embodying love and care and appreciation and then exuding it outwards. And that's a very simplified explanation.
Mhm.
But if we have enough people in enough places doing this often enough throughout the day, we change the frequency of operation. Whereas in the last 2 years, it's been like brought down as rapidly and as aggressively as possible. What do we do now to raise it back up?
Yes. There is a word that you've used a few times in our conversation today. I heard you use it, when I was part of that event with you, coherence. Can you tell us what that means? Share with us the value of coherence. Like that was one of the things that really stood out for me when you and I first met was this concept of
Right.
coherence.
So we know that our brain sends messages to our body. So for your listeners or viewers who are watching the video version, I talk with my hands a lot.
Mhm.
And so that's my brain telling my body to wave your hands wildly because you think it's going to make people understand you better, whether it does or just as a distraction, whatever. So we know consciously that our brain sends messages that move our body. Our brain can also send messages that can affect our internal things. So we know that if we get frightened, our heart rates will speed up.
Mm.
So inversely to that, what few people realize is that our bodies send signals to our brain. And in fact, our heart sends more signals, more messages to our brain than our brain sends to our heart.
Mm.
So coherence is getting into a state where we are regulating that messenger system so that we are in coherence means that we are in a harmonious flow in mind and body so that we can regulate that heart rhythm. And a lot of people, who use the aura ring, they'll see that heart rate variability. And a good heart rate variability score basically means that you can go from highs and lows and re-regulate quite easily. And self-regulation, the ability to self-regulate, is the key to longevity. I don't remember the statistic, but it's something like 15% increase in longevity when you have the ability to self-regulate.
Yes.
So getting into coherence is that ability to self-regulate. So you can regulate that heart rhythm. You can smooth out your breathing. You can embody love. You can radiate love outwards to a certain individual, to a collective of humans. And this is proven in prayer, like the power of distance prayer has a lot of research behind it. And so what happens is that you don't just regulate the rhythm of your heart. You don't just calm the mind and move yourself into a prefrontal cortex thinking mind, but you also improve the functioning of your immune system, of your circulatory system, of your respiratory system, of your cardiac system, of your nervous system. So getting into coherence creates a full autonomous harmony throughout your entire being, your body, your mind, and your spirit, if we want to go into the ethereal field. So that is what coherence is. And most people function from an incoherent place. And we know this, and we use it in our language. When someone is hysterical, they're incoherent, they can't pay attention, they're not listening, they're not concentrating, they can't take in and process information. And 99% of the population is in a coherent state, is in an incoherent state most of the time. And we know that by getting flipped off on the freeway, or, when someone has that automatic aggressive reaction, that's an incoherent reaction. That's that lack of emotional intelligence to have the skills and tools to step back and be like, okay, what is happening here? How do I respond instead of react?
Yes.
So that's my explanation.
I love it. My listeners should go back and listen to that out like twice. It's so powerful. And I want to nerd out with you for a moment on the integration between what you're saying and emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence essentially has two main constructs, right? Like there's the self-regulation piece, the self-awareness, self-regulation, like how do I manage self? That's one piece of emotional intelligence, or one pillar, if you will, of emotional intelligence. And the second pillar is relationship management. So from a place of self-awareness, self-regulation, self-management, how do I then step into my relationships? How do I then, manage my relationships, communication, like all of those other skills fall into that sort of second pillar of emotional intelligence. And what I'm hearing when you talk about coherence is that there's a similar sort of intersection, if you will. There's that self-coherence piece of it, right? Like my head, heart, where's the coherence there? And from that place of personal coherence, how does that then impact my relationships? How does that then impact my team and my leadership, right? How does that impact how I show up in the world? And if I'm hearing you correctly, I think what you're saying, Meghan, is that when we are in coherence, it sounds like to me from a subconscious level, we're calling others into a deeper sense of coherence.
Yes. And what's so powerful about it, and that's an amazing summary. And I don't have much training in the more formal emotional intelligence, so I just learned something. What's so incredible is that the other party doesn't need to know. They don't need to be actively participating in what you are doing. And one of the best ways to explain this is if you think about your child, or, if you care for a young person, or you've been around, you even see in a supermarket, the children having the meltdown. And typically the parent is meeting the child at the energetic level the child is at. So the child's melting down, the parent gets intense, the parent might lose their patience, be like, could you stop that? Like, stop it. Like we're out in public, like, don't do that. And it then escalates. Whereas if as a parent, You can. And I use this because this is often a situation we can find ourselves in, especially with younger children or teenagers. But if you as a parent can center yourself, it can de-escalate anything else going on around you. And the same is then true. And we can't. So if you're in a place where you can't self-regulate first, you can't get into a place of coherence, and something happens out there, that's where we get into the blaming and shaming and naming, where it's like, well, why are you being like that? No.
Yes.
You did this to me. And that you can't correct from the root when you're in that mindset.
Yes.
So maybe that other person needs to do the work. Probably they do.
Sure.
But they're not going to know it if you just become a reflection of whatever they say that to you, then you bounce back more, and then it escalates. Whereas if someone says that to you and you say, I understand that you're frustrated and I hear what you're saying. What can we do to resolve this?
Yes.
And you do it kindly with a smile without being condescending.
Yes.
Or saying, you know what? I can feel that you're really frustrated. Can we just take a pause and revisit this when we can, have a calm conversation about it? And even that can be enough, because sometimes even, I know myself, sometimes I know that if I get attacked in that way, or if we call it that, there will be times when I can respond calmly. And there'll be times that my immediate feeling is to lash back or react back. And so I may need a moment to just kind of center myself so that we can, again, get into that critical, creative, solution oriented, where we both learn something, we both evolve to that next little level. And we're not going to get there every time, but even at the very least, you walk away from an interaction saying like, well, that wasn't my best work. At least you're aware of it enough to know, okay, next time, this is what I could do. And then it can help us to progress.
Yeah, I love it. One of the foundational pillars of our curriculum, right, inside of some of our training labs for women. First of all, I should say this. It's what's so fascinating about what you're saying is, so at my psychotherapy clinic, we absolutely work with couples and families, and, we work with the entire family system. Inside of my coaching company, the EQ Code Training Labs, we work only with women. So we work with the one person who's in relationship with many. And one of our core pillars of training, our first pillar, it's called emotional mastery. And emotional mastery is all about taking radical, wild responsibility for self. And that's what I hear you talking about, Meghan. Like, it's this idea that if I can feel empowered in knowing that when I take radical, like I stop blaming, I stop shaming, I stop looking at external factors as the reason why I am feeling the way that I am feeling, and I take radical responsibility for my emotions, for my ability to master those emotions, for my ability to self-regulate, for my ability to be in coherence, to use your language, it's actually the most empowering position I can take in my life, in my business, and in all of my relationships. So I was like, I had to like bite my tongue to not jump in as you were talking, because I was so excited by what you were saying. Like, I think there's such a strong congruence between this practice of coherence and some of the training that we do with women, around, what is it like to improve your relationships when maybe that other person's not interested in participating?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's challenging. I mean, I don't know the first thing about managing family relationships. I've got my own held together strongly. I think that's my limit. That and my garden, about the only things I can keep alive. That's my limit. But it's interesting because there's an element of self-responsibility. And there's an element, and I've been teaching nutrition, culinary nutrition for 14 years. And one of the keys there, just as here, is leading by example and being consistent so that you keep getting stronger and better. And one of the things that people will try to do is make these radical shifts when they're deep in it. And that's the hardest time.
Yes.
The hardest time to make a health shift is when you're in a health crisis. The hardest time to make a shift in your emotional operating system is when you're in an emotional crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to do it in the scope
Yes.
of the globe right now. However, that's why on the good days, it's just as important to practice as on the challenging days, so that on the challenging days, you remember that you have the practice and you're not just stuck into the negative spiral of thought or action that is getting you to where you don't want to be.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I love it. I could stay here all day, but I want to make sure that um, we give our audience some strategies, because people are always looking for strategies. What are some of your best strategies for maintaining that physical and emotional well-being, particularly under times of intense stress?
Right. One of the first and most important, and there's a few little lifestyle things I want to start with. So
Mhm.
most people start their day on their phones. Stop it. Like, just, you never feel better after that. And so the
No.
worst thing you can do is start your day taking in that frequency of information. The second worst is ending your day with that frequency of
Yeah.
information, because whatever you're taking in is what you're going to marinate in.
Hmm.
So if instead your phones or your devices or whatever do not ever enter your bedroom, if you have 2 levels to your home, they never enter the second level of your home. So they stay in
Wow.
the kitchen or whatever,
Hmm.
so that at least you get up, you do your morning thing, whatever, whether it's, meditation or showering or whatever, that you do that just with your own thoughts, your own being. And that time you might spend scrolling or checking email or texts or whatever, at the very least, take 5 full deep breaths where you're inhaling
Mm.
for 5, holding for 5, exhaling for 5, holding for 5, inhaling for 5, 5 times. So it's like the
Yeah.
5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Do that. And at the like, that will change your morning.
Yeah.
And if you do
Yes.
the exact same things before you go to sleep. And so right there, that may not bring you into your full maximum coherent state, but it's still putting you in a better,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then if you wanted to do a full coherence practice, it's so simple. The Heart Math Institute calls it the heart lock-in technique, where after you've regulated your breathing, you focus that breathing to keep coming in through your nose and out through your nose. And then you begin to envision that breath coming in and out through your heart center.
Mm.
And the best visual I can offer is the Care Bears doing the Care Bear stare,
Hmm.
where they would line up and just beam hearts out of their bellies. So maybe I just dated myself a little bit, but children of the 80s know exactly what this is. And and so what you do is you envision this breath, you envision energy. You can envision it with, however you need to, a pink light coming into your heart center and out through your heart center as you're breathing. And then you embody heart-centered emotions, which is love, care, compassion, kindness, generosity, gratitude. And you feel what that feels like in your body. And you might, again, it could be, what does it feel like to be hugged by someone where you don't want them to let go, they don't ever let go, and it's just this warmth and this feeling of being absolutely unconditionally supported.
Mm.
And so you envision this in your body and you feel good doing it, so you kind of want to keep doing it. And for some people, this is going to be a little bit challenging. It might feel anxiety laden, or you keep wanting to open your eyes or check the time or look around. That's okay. Just as when you catch yourself doing that, close your eyes, go back to that breath and just keep doing it. Because when you say like, oh, I can't meditate, I get anxious, I can't, what that is the bubbling up or the untying of knots. So if you think about pouring a glass of bubbly water and it like surges with those bubbles and slowly they kind of leave the edge of the glass and move to the surface, that's what's happening. So you're not
Mhm.
actually getting stressed out by meditating. You're unstressing or de-stressing. And it can feel the same with it leaving as it does coming in. And so it's just building up that habit. And so when you've got your eyes closed and you're embodying that love, and then when you feel ready, you could just keep it to yourself that day. That's
Mhm.
okay. But if you feel ready, you can also exude it outwards. So you can radiate it to people in your household, to people on your street, to someone you had a challenging interaction with, to someone you're going to be seeing later that day, to the whole world. And you radiate that outwards. And that's the practice and that's it. And so it
Mm.
doesn't necessarily even have to be, 10 minutes in the morning when you wake up, you're like, I don't have that time. I've got small children. I've got to get somewhere. It could be, when I sit down at my desk, most people sit down at their desk and the first thing they do is they check their email or they look on social media.
Yeah.
They waste 10 minutes. Do this instead to get into the zone of what you have to do that day. And the rest of the day will be better. You can do it at a stoplight. Anytime you're at a red light, just focus on your breathing and radiate love. You can do it walking, you can do it driving, you can do it with your eyes open, you can do it with your eyes closed, you can do it in line at the supermarket. And so that's the practice. And so the more frequently you can do this throughout the day, the better you feel, the better your entire body will operate harmoniously from a biochemical perspective. And it will change your perception of the world around you. And suddenly you start to live in a beautiful, loving world where things that are serendipitous seem to happen to you all the time. And, whether it's, gratitude brings in more goodness, or you're just there to, you're there for the party. It changes how you live in the world. And that's ultimately what we want, because we are creating our own realities in every moment.
That's right. That's right. I couldn't agree with you more. I love how simple it is. I love how practical it is. I love how portable it is. You know what I mean? Like you can literally just do this anywhere, right? Any time, any moment you have. Like I would even say, even if you had 30 seconds, if you had a minute, like you can easily just, take yourself into this practice and feel the benefits, and we know that just like with any practice, the more we practice it, the easier it is for us to get into that place of coherence.
Well, what we end up doing the more we practice it is we're raising our default setting, so that the more you practice it, even when you get to so if my meditation teacher, when I first learned meditation, described it as dyeing fabric. So when they're dyeing fabric in India, they dye the fabric and they put it out in the sun and it fades, and they dye it and they put it out in the sun and it fades a bit more. But every time they put it in the dye and put it out to the sun, it doesn't fade as much each time, till ultimately you become super saturated, color stayed, and it's just how you are.
Yes.
And that's what we want to think about with this practice. The more you do it, like you will dip back into those stressful moments, but every time you become a little bit less and less reactive. And so you keep building up those sort of stores of resilience and that coherence in your body.
Oh, Meghan, this was such an incredible conversation. I know my audience is going to want to know, where can they go to find you? Like what is the best place? We're going to link up your websites. We have a free coherence class available.
Yes.
We have a free culinary class available. So you're definitely going to want to take advantage of those things. Where else can we come to find you?
Yeah. So my website is meghantelpner.com. So the coherence class is at meghantelpner.com/magic. And that's where you'll get access to this. I don't have a lot of other stuff. I have some blog posts on these topics, but I'm working on a new program, but it's always sort of like in due time, because I still run the Academy of Culinary Nutrition, but I'll have more time to do more of this soon. And if anyone is looking for that extra motivation in the kitchen, that's all at culinarynutrition.com. And some people come to this work first and then go to the food. Some people are in the food first and they're like, wait a second, and then come to this. And they work so well in sync, because you can't function at your highest level when you're filling your body with the lowest form of I don't even call it nourishment, but the lowest form of caloric intake.
Yes.
So when you start to elevate the quality of everything in your life, you're elevating that set point. You want the best of everything.
Yes.
And so emotional intelligence, culinary nutrition, physical activity, it all works together. And what's so beautiful about it is that as you commit to it and stay consistent, and not consistent in that you're doing everything perfect and you're checking off your list, and don't type A this, just start and be consistent with your effort, because every bit of effort counts and it's all cumulative. And so I started talking more when you really just wanted me to say where to find me, but that's where I
love
am.
it. I
And
love
I'm
that.
on,
Well, and it's
I'm on
full
Instagram
circle,
too.
right? It's so full circle because we started with the integration of the physical and the emotional resilience, and it really did come full circle. Thank you so much for your time. For my audience, absolutely, please go and check out those links, especially the meghantelpner.com/magic. I promise you it is magic, and so well worth your time. Meghan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.